Amidst a federal inquiry, 41-year-old Corey Harrison made a startling revelation regarding his father, Rick Harrison. There was a pawn shop in the middle of the glitz and splendor of Las Vegas that was unlike any other. Thanks to a reality TV show that highlighted the competitive world of purchasing and selling rare antiques, historical objects, and valuable treasures, its renown went beyond the neon lights of the city and reached a global audience. $1 million agreements were made there with the same casualness as a simple change-for-change transaction. This famous pawn shop's face, the adored Pawnstars star Rick Harrison, was a man who personified the American dream. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell for updates before we proceed. Rick Harrison became a household name for more than 10 years. He was a favorite among fans because of his sardonic wit, caustic humor, and firm but reasonable business methods. The concept of a self-made businessman who understood the importance of history and the skill of bargaining was adored by viewers. He rose from modest beginnings to the pinnacles of fame and wealth thanks to the success of his pawn shop and the Pawn Stars television program. However, a sinister and perilous world was gradually emerging behind the scenes, under the shadow of his public persona, one that would upend everything the public believed they knew about the man they admired. Then, amid the meteoric rise of his empire, food took an unexpected turn, causing a scandal that would shatter the entire foundation of his legacy. The most surprising source of all was Rick Harrison's own son, Corey Harrison, who made the shocking discovery following a spectacular FBI raid on his Las Vegas estate. Corey Harrison was neither a government operative nor a whistleblower. At 41, Corey has been a regular on the Pawn Stars show for a long time. Corey was a millionaire's kid who had been surrounded by his father's wealth. He had watched Rick start a company from the ground up as a child and had, in many respects, emulated him. The father-son relationship appeared to be indestructible until Corey realized how profound the lies were, as he acknowledged. The world is in shock after Corey finally broke his silence and made a startling admission. According to allegations, his father, Rick Harrison, was a part of a vast criminal network that included money laundering, people trafficking, and illegal financial transactions that were concealed for years under the pretense of the family business. The shocking admission sent shockwaves through the media. For many years, Rick Harrison had been a man who seemed impervious to scandal and represented prosperity and hard work. Now, however, everything is different. The accusations that Corey disclosed were really frightening. The man who had created a corporate empire that was revered and imitated by entrepreneurs throughout the world, and who had served as an inspiration to millions of people, was now facing federal charges that might ruin all he had worked so hard to achieve. Corey's confession showed more than simply a man struggling to accept the reality of his father's wrongdoing. It revealed the unsettling fact that even his closest friends and family were ignorant of the depth of the dishonesty. What was actually happening behind closed doors was unknown to me. In his first interview with the public following the revelation, Corey confessed, "Like everyone else, I was astonished when the FBI knocked. That someone I have always looked up to might have been involved in something like this is difficult to comprehend." His remarks were unvarnished and full of incredulity, but they also revealed a terrible aspect of the man who had been his hero. Questions started to surface when the confession spread through the media. How could Rick Harrison, who was so well known on television for his honesty and fairness, have been complicit in such horrible crimes? How could his friends, family, and staff have been totally unaware of the illegal activity occurring right in front of them? The disclosure made everyone reevaluate how they saw the well-liked pawnshop tycoon, and the more information that came to light, the more serious the issue became. Our story, which is about celebrity, wealth, treachery, and the shadowy side of the American dream, starts here. A father and son, ripped apart by secrets that should never have been kept hidden, are at the center of this story. But in order to comprehend how we got here, we must first examine the ascent of Rick Harrison, the guy who turned Pawn Stars into one of the most popular reality series ever, and how House of Cards finally served as the foundation for the glittering world of fame and fortune. The American dream served as the foundation for Rick Harrison's ascent to fame. Compared to the opulent Las Vegas property that would ultimately come to represent his prosperity, Rick Harrison's narrative started in a far more modest setting. Rick was born in Lexington, North Carolina in 1965, and his early years were everything from glitzy. At 16, he decided to drop out of high school, a choice that would lead to adversity but also to tenacity and fortitude. Rick chose to make his own way in the business world, particularly in the pawn sector, rather than taking the conventional path of education and stability. In the late 1980s, he established the world-famous Gold and Silver Pawn Store, a small pawn store in Las Vegas. Situated on the infamous Las Vegas Strip, The store was a modest establishment where Rick bought and sold costly stuff such as jewels and antiques. However, his ability to strike wise bargains and his developing image as a trustworthy businessman allowed him to gradually expand his clientele. Rick's life transformed in ways he never could have predicted at the beginning of the 2000s. Reality TV producers noticed the possibility for a new show after seeing how successful his pawn shop was. What began as a modest idea for a reality show about a family-owned pawn store swiftly gained widespread popularity. The world first saw Rick Harrison, his son Corey, and their colorful cast of personalities, including their go-to expert Chumley when Pawnstars debuted on the History Channel in 2009. The show quickly gained popularity. Every week, viewers came in to witness the intriguing haggling over everything from rare antiques to Hollywood memorabilia between patrons and the pawn shop employees. Rick was a born celebrity because of his composed yet commanding demeanor. Sharp-witted, smart, and always prepared with a clever joke, he was the epitome of a successful businessman. The public was not the only audience enthralled with the event. Millions of people watched Pawn Stars every week, making it one of the highest-rated cable programs. The name Rick Harrison was well known. The man who had gone from owning a modest pawn shop to being a TV star and millionaire seemed to be a living example of the American dream. Hard effort, perseverance, and a little bit of luck seemed to be the keys to his success. The federal probe was the pivotal moment. However, like many success stories, Rick Harrison's ascent to prominence had a hidden price. The exact thing that made him so successful, his pawn shop empire, is what ultimately led to his downfall. There were rumors of anomalies, of offers that seemed too good to be true, of transactions that did not quite match up beneath the gleaming surface of the Pawn Stars brand. The FBI had been surreptitiously looking at Rick Harrison's company for years, but the full extent of the probe was not made public until the summer of 2025. The public was unaware that agents were working behind the scenes to piece together a huge case involving criminal networks, money laundering, and human trafficking. In reality, what seemed to be a straightforward pawn store was serving as a front for illicit activity that most people had been unaware of for years. The world was forced to face the truth of what had been going on behind the scenes when the FBI conducted a highly publicized raid on Rick Harrison's estate. The legacy of the Harrison family and Corey Harrison's life were irrevocably altered at this point. Corey disclosed the unimaginable in an exclusive interview. The father who had been the pillar of their family, the guy he had revered throughout his life, had engaged in actions that no one could have predicted. A broken family, the confession. Corey's words were filled with grief and incredulity when he sat down to discuss the circumstances. His voice trembled as he replied, "I never believed my dad would be capable of this. I was shocked to learn about the probe. It was unbelievable to me. I did not anticipate it." Corey's admission signaled the start of a public and emotional breakdown. His admission exposed his father's involvement in illegal operations, as well as the psychological toll it had taken on him. The public suddenly saw the guy who had been his hero and role model as a criminal mastermind. The Harrison family was thus thrust into the middle of a scandal that would permanently alter their life after one startling revelation. Rick Harrison did not come from a wealthy or privileged family. He was raised in a modest home after being born in Lexington, North Carolina, on March 22, 1965. Rick had a less than glamorous upbringing because he was the kid of a low-income family. When he was 16, he left high school and relocated to Las Vegas to start over with his family. At first, Rick was not interested in business. Instead, he was looking for a means to earn enough money to sustain himself. He was looking for his life's meaning, just like a lot of young individuals. But there was no denying his passion for entrepreneurship. He entered the corporate world for the first time as a teenager. He started his first pawn store, the Gold and Silver Pawn Store in Las Vegas, when he was 18 years old. Although it was a little endeavor, it marked the start of an empire worth millions of dollars. In contrast to many of the pawn shops of the time, Rick was dedicated to making his business unique, concentrating on gaining the trust of his clients and establishing a reputation for being fair in all of his transactions. The foundation of his success will shortly be his efforts. It was almost by chance that Rick went from being a small-time businessman to becoming a well-known television personality. Rick's pawn store was discovered by a production team searching for fresh concepts for reality television in the early 2000s. They approached Rick with an offer he could not turn down after realizing the potential for his show, which would reveal the fascinating world of rare antiques, historical treasures, and human drama that frequently played out in the pawn shop. It was a risk, but Rick would quickly come to understand that it would permanently alter his life. In 2009, the History Channel launched Pawn Stars, a show that chronicled Rick's pawn shop's daily activities and the many characters who assisted in running it. Almost instantly, the show became popular. It has a straightforward format. To have their belongings evaluated, and if feasible, sold, people would bring them in. Rick, the tough yet fair patriarch, was at the heart of Pawn Stars' charm, which was found in the personalities of the players. He was the ideal character for reality TV because of his sharp wit, no-nonsense demeanor, and ability to bargain over costs. His business grew over time as the program's audience grew, with millions of people tuning in each week to witness Rick and his staff deal with the highs and lows of the pawn industry. Rick's genuineness was what audiences found most endearing. He was not your average reality TV personality. He was a businessman with a thorough understanding of his field. Rick became a household name as the program's ratings continued to dominate. People enjoyed watching him bargain over prices, joke about with clients, and offer illuminating background information on the goods they brought in. Rick was viewed by viewers as a representation of the American ideal, a person who rose from modest beginnings to establish his own empire. Corey Harrison, Rick's son, frequently accompanied him on the show. Corey was a perfect fit for Rick's right-hand man role because he had grown up in the pawn industry. As time went on, Corey and other store employees, including Chumlee, another beloved character, were given increasing prominence on the show. However, Pawn Stars' success was due to more than simply its humor and drama. It was Rick's exaggerated demeanor and his portrayal of the archetypal American businessman. He was more than just an entrepreneur. He was a legendary figure. However, as is sometimes the case with celebrities, Pawn Stars' triumph was ultimately overshadowed by more sinister forces. The celebrity that had previously supported Rick Harrison's empire suddenly started to shine through it like a magnifying glass, revealing every flaw in the facade. The urge to overdo things accompanied success, and rumors of improper behavior started to circulate. The Pawn Stars' success. It seemed as though the world had just stumbled across Rick Harrison's little slice of Las Vegas when Pawn Stars became a huge sensation. What started off as a tiny pawn shop has grown to become one of America's most well-known companies. Outside the gold and silver pawn store, tourists from all over the world waited in line to see the stars. The success of the show was largely attributed to Rick and his crew, but Rick's empire took off after he became famous on television. The riches of the Harrison family increased along with Pawn Stars' fame. Their earnings increased with every season, and the shop evolved into a successful enterprise that offered more than just pawn trades. It has to do with the brand. In addition to establishing a successful business, Rick had gained notoriety in popular culture and frequently appeared on talk shows and at public gatherings. Additionally, he opened several sites and expanded the shop with his newfound renown, solidifying his status as one of Las Vegas's most prosperous merchants. Because of Pawn Stars' success, Rick and his family were able to live a lifestyle that many people could only imagine. The Harrisons were frequently spotted in exclusive social circles, stayed in five-star resorts, and flew in private aircraft. Rick established himself as a mainstay in the world of luxury, socializing with other well-known and affluent people. It appeared to the general public that Rick Harrison was a man who had risen from poverty and created an empire, exemplifying the American ideal. But despite all of the fame and praise, I suffered from the stress of being in the spotlight all the time. Every season raised the bar, and Rick came under more and more criticism from both his supporters and those who wished to bring him down. His private life, his commercial dealings, and even his treatment of his staff were all open to public scrutiny. The Harrison family's empire started to show signs of weakness as Pawn Stars reached its zenith. Whispers about poor management, unethical business methods, and shady connections began to circulate, along with rumors about the pressure Rick was under. These rumors were initially written off as just gossip, a cost of being famous. However, these rumors got more prevalent over time, and it became evident that Rick's ascent to prominence was not without its problems. The hidden aspects of the pawn shop industry. Not everything was as it seemed behind the scenes of the dazzling television program. It was unknown to the audience that Rick Harrison's pawn shop was a front for much more than just buying and selling commodities. There was a side to the pawn industry that had been kept under wraps for years, as Corey Harrison subsequently disclosed in his shocking confession. It was a side Rick Harrison had kept under wraps, one that included intricate financial dealings, links to illegal activity, and affiliations with criminal organizations. The reality was much harsher than Pawn Stars' idyllic portrayal of a father and son collaborating in a family-run company. The cornerstone of the Harrison family's empire was upended when Corey came clean about his father's involvement in illegal activities, such as money laundering and human trafficking. Once the symbol of justice and trust in the pawn industry, Rick Harrison was now dealing with charges that may undo all of his hard-earned success. The public was shocked by Corey's admission of his father's actions, which made them reevaluate what they had seen on the show. After years of admiration for his business savvy and approachable personality, the man they had been watching was suddenly the focus of a significant federal investigation. Under the weight of criminal accusations, the empire that had been created on Rick Harrison's charisma, his strong business methods, and his TV stardom was suddenly collapsing. Few could have foreseen the magnitude of the revelations that would soon be revealed in the early phases of the investigation. As a self-made guy who earned his fame and fortune on his own terms, Rick Harrison had long been seen by the public as a representation of American commercial success. However, the initial indications of danger were hardly noticeable, and the wheels of justice were quietly working behind the scenes. At first, only a small number of people were raising doubts about Harrison's business practices. Several former employees said that the financial documents contained inconsistencies that did not line up. They asserted that several transactions were suspiciously large or irregular, and that the sums of money going through the shop's accounts did not match the numbers on paper. These workers could not get rid of the feeling that something was not right, even though they felt like their concerns were being disregarded or covered up. Initially, there appeared to be minor discrepancies, peculiar business procedures, lost invoices, and peculiar financial dealings, just enough to unnerve a few people, but not enough to clearly indicate criminal behavior. Shortly after, the individuals who voiced these concerns were either fired or reassigned, and the public no longer heard the comments. At first glance, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but a much darker image was beginning to emerge beneath the glitzy exterior of the pawn shop empire. The FBI did not start a serious investigation until they got an anonymous tip. The tipster gave the federal authorities information that would start the investigation, since they had inside knowledge of the activities at the gold and silver pawn store. The source claimed that Rick Harrison's pawn shop was being used as a front for much more sinister operations. The tipster believed that the public was unaware of the true nature of the illicit financial operations, money laundering, and human trafficking that were reportedly taking place behind the scenes. The tip gave the FBI just enough information to begin a more in-depth inquiry. What started out as a straightforward investigation into potential financial irregularities quickly expanded into a comprehensive operation to reveal the illicit activities occurring inside Rick Harrison's company. The investigation was quiet at first. Without informing the public or Harrison's legal team, the agents worked covertly, obtaining information, speaking with staff, and pursuing leads. The investigation was even riskier because it was conducted in silence. Rick Harrison carried on with his pawn store business as usual as the FBI pieced together the jigsaw. He kept up his public image by promoting the show, going to TV appearances, and leading an opulent lifestyle that millions of people watched with envy.